The Union Screaming House case is among the most petrifying and unsettling occurrences ever recorded in the world of paranormal investigation. Constructed in 1936 on land owned by Captain John T. Crow, the house was also referred to as the White House. In May 2001, American author Stephen LaChance and his 3 children urgently sought a new residence in Union, Missouri. The lease on their previous apartment, where they'd lived for 2 years, was about to expire, and they needed to find a new place to avoid homelessness. So when a woman called Stephen about an old house available in the area, he was naturally intrigued. He booked a viewing for the upcoming Sunday, which he awaited with great anticipation. Upon arriving at the house with his daughter, Stephen was immediately struck by the aroma of freshly baked cookies. The wooden structure of the house was well preserved, featuring 2 floors with 3 bedrooms, a spacious family kitchen, and a laundry leading to the back door. The basement housed an old butcher's shower and a fruit cellar. After thoroughly examining the house, Stephen decided that it was the perfect home for his family. He felt an instant connection to the house, and he believed that he and his children would easily adapt to their new environment. When Stephen submitted the application form to the landlady, she asked him if he understood the responsibility of living in such an old house. He agreed, unaware of the implications of his acceptance. The landlady said she would get back to him and continued her business with other potential tenants. Despite an odd feeling about the landlady, Stephen couldn't pinpoint anything specifically unusual about her. Her demeanour was more like a museum curator than a typical real estate agent, making Stephen feel like he was on a charity house tour. A week later, the landlady called to inform Stephen that his application was successful. She instructed him to meet her at a restaurant the next day to finalise the paperwork and make the payment. Although still suspicious of the woman, Stephen was overjoyed to be the new tenant. After completing the formalities, Stephen and his children moved into their new home that weekend, coinciding with Memorial Weekend. Their first night in the new house was uneventful, perhaps lulling the family into a false sense of security before the house's horrors revealed themselves. The first strange incident took place in the living room, when Stephen hung a large picture of 2 angels. As soon as he turned away, the picture fell to the floor with a loud crash. It seemed like something was protesting against the hanging of the pictures. This happened 3 times, with the picture falling again each time it was hung. On the 3rd attempt, Stephen felt a sudden rush of air and something hitting the back of his ankles. Turning around, he saw the picture lying at his feet. Frustrated, he hung it once more, exclaiming, "Stay there, damn it!" Soon after, Stephen's daughter called him to the front porch, where she pointed out an old man walking down the sidewalk towards their house. When the man neared their home, he crossed to the other side of the street. According to the daughter, this behaviour was common amongst passerbys, for reasons unknown. Stephen confirmed her observation as he sat on the porch and noticed that everyone avoided their house. Some people didn't even acknowledge his greetings, choosing to lower their heads and continue walking. Stephen reasoned that their behaviour might be due to initial uncertainty about the new neighbours. However, it was odd that so many people were acting in this manner. The following Sunday, Stephen asked his youngest son to retrieve the garden hose from the basement to clean the walkways and wash the house's weathered siding. Moments later, the son screamed from inside the house. Stephen rushed inside and found his son in the kitchen, shaking and with a puddle of urine at his feet. When Stephen asked what had happened, his son looked at him with wide, terrified eyes and said with a quivering voice, "Something chasing me up the basement steps." When Stephen inquired about the identity of the pursuer, the boy replied, "I don't know, Daddy, but it was big." Stephen and his other 2 children searched the basement but found nothing except the garden hose, which the boy had dropped in his panic. The remainder of that Sunday and Monday passed without further incidents, allowing Stephen and his children to start settling into their new home. They tried to put aside any lingering thoughts that something might be awry in the house. However, this peace was short-lived, as another unsettling event soon transpired. The following Friday, Stephen and his daughter sent the boys to the car while they performed a quick check around the house ensuring all the lights switched off before they left. Upon returning home later that night, they were shocked to discover every single light in the house turned on. This peculiarity deeply unsettled Stephen, as he couldn't think of any reason for all the lights to be on other than an intruder. After searching the entire house, he found nothing. Then his daughter in the living room started complaining about feeling cold, which seemed odd to Stephen, who was sweating as if the heating was turned up to the max. When he stepped into the living room, he too experienced the unexplainable drop in temperature, as if it had fallen by around 30 degrees Fahrenheit. This was Stephen's first clue there might be a paranormal presence in the house. As if that wasn't enough, his daughter suddenly exclaimed, "Daddy, Daddy, it's getting warm in here." Indeed, Stephen watched in disbelief as the thermostat rapidly increased. That night, his children slept in his room, but Stephen himself hardly slept at all. On Sunday evening, while relaxing in the living room with his children, Stephen caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of his eye. The motion seemed to come from the kitchen doorway, leading into the family room. It appeared to be a figure, a dark figure of a man. While the man seemed solid, his form also consisted of a misty, swirling dark grey smoke or fog. Thankfully, Stephen's children did not notice the figure, as their backs were facing the living room. Thinking it might have been an optical illusion, Stephen looked away for a few seconds, but when he glanced back, the mysterious, wispy figure remained and began to move. When the figure entered the family room and stopped in the centre, it remained a swirling mass of murky darkness. And what felt like an eternity, the figure dissipated into the air. Rattled by this incident, Stephen's mind raced to consider his next steps. Above all, he needed to stay calm for himself and his children. He could easily succumb to panic and fear, fleeing the house screaming, like a character from a haunted house movie. Or he could calmly and quietly leave the house with his children, reflecting on the experience later. Opting for the latter, he calmly told his children, "Let's go get a soda and see Grandma." His youngest child was excited, but his two other children looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. As they exited through the back door, they heard a man's agonizing scream from inside the house. The scream was so loud that it echoed down the street and set the dogs barking. At this point, Stephen's resolve cracked, and he yelled for his children to get in the car. As they drove away, his youngest son, his voice trembling with fear, said, "Daddy, the basement monster's standing in the upstairs window." After staying at his parents' house for a week to calm down and gather his thoughts, Stephen realized he had no choice but to return to the old white house. He had invested all of his savings in it, believing he had found his dream home. So, he and his children returned to the house the following Friday night, hoping there would be no more strange incidents. The weekend passed without issue, although sleep was scarce for all. That Saturday, Stephen discovered various personal items in the large shed behind the house that seemed to belong to different people. His parents suggested he call the landlady to inquire about the house's history. The conversation was awkward and odd. When he asked the landlady if any previous tenants had mentioned a ghost, she initially claimed not to remember. She eventually mentioned a female tenant who claims her deceased father visited her. The landlady dismissed the woman as slightly mad. The items in the shed belonged to this woman and to another man who had abruptly left in the middle of the night, abandoning all of his possessions. The landlady, however, denied ever hearing anyone else mention ghosts. When Stephen asked about the timeline of these tenants, she replied that it was no more than a year ago, and then asked why he was inquiring. The phone call didn't provide much help to Stephen, but there was little else he could do to learn more about the house. As the remainder of the long weekend passed without any further incidents, Stephen began to believe it was a one-time experience. However, on Monday, another bizarre event occurred, proving him wrong. He was on the phone with his mother while the children played in the bedroom on the first floor. During the conversation, he heard the interior doors rattling. Assuming it was the children, he yelled at them to stop making a noise. As the door shook even more violently, he yelled once more for them to behave. However, when he heard his daughter's scared voice respond, "Daddy, I'm in here, and my brothers are all asleep," A wave of unease washed over him as he realized that something was definitely wrong. This feeling was intensified when the temperature in the house once again suddenly dropped 30 degrees. Then the screaming began, and from above he could hear something massive and heavy descending the stairs slowly. As the entire house shook and boomed simultaneously, Stephen's nerves shattered, and he knew he had to grab his children and flee the house as quickly as possible. The house continued to shake, boom and scream as Steve reached the front door with his children, rushing out into the porch and slamming the door behind them. They could still hear the horrifying sounds, even as they sped away from the property in their car. That was the final night Steve and his children stayed in the house. The only time he approached it again was to collect a few personal belongings left behind, always bringing someone along. Each person who accompanied him experienced something strange in the house. Eerie whispers, screams and heavy thudding from the floor above. Whatever presence occupied the house, it was no longer limiting its unsettling displays to Steve and his children, but was now revealing them to anyone who came near the building. About a month after leaving the property, a female friend sent Steve a website address urging him to search John T. Crow, Missouri. When he did, a man's face appeared on the screen. A face he recognized from a picture his brother had taken in the fruit cellar one afternoon while packing to move. The man was a famous figure from the American Civil War, and the land had a history dating back to the conflict as well. Captain Crow established the militia during the Civil War. The house was built on former slave quarters and the Franklin County poorhouse, with an old infirmary nearby. As was customary at the time, those who died there were buried in unmarked graves or listed for the St. Louis poorhouse. Some bodies were sent to medical schools. Folklore suggests that souls buried in this manner, or those without a proper religious burial, cannot find peace and are destined to wander the earth forever. This is the backdrop for Stephen LaChance's book The Uninvited, in which he recounts his supernatural experience as a resident of the property and the assistance he provided for the next tenant. Today, the Union Screaming House has been transformed into a dog kennel by the landlady. This could indicate that, considering the ghostly activity experienced by successful tenants, she may have run out of potential clients for the property. As for Steve LaChance, although he has long since left the house, he is still plagued by terrible nightmares and haunting images of the strange events he experienced within the property. Stephen's stories are featured on the Discovery Channel's A Haunting and in the documentary film Children of the Grave. His experiences at the Union House led him to establish the Missouri Paranormal Research Society. Stephen frequently speaks at paranormal conferences and has traveled the United States with the Haunted Survivors Tour.